I was helping my mom organize the family album when I found the photo. It was one of my favorites. Everyone gathered in the backyard, smiling under the golden light of a late summer afternoon. But something was wrong. Where I should have been, there was a jagged cutout, as if someone had deliberately taken a pair of scissors. I looked closer, and it was impossible not to notice. All eyes in the photo were fixed on that empty space, the space that had previously been mine. My chest tightened. I recognized the cropping style. My sister Emily had a long-standing habit of cutting out magazines and albums to make collages, but why would she do that to this photo? I went into the living room and found Emily indifferently fiddling with her phone. I showed her the picture and asked why. She just smiled, a cold smile, and said, "Not everyone needs to be in every memory." Those words echoed in my mind, like a blow that takes time to hurt, but when it does, it hits hard. I returned to my room, sat on the bed, and stared at the empty space on the paper. Something inside me stirred. It wasn't pure sadness. There was also anger, a knot of feelings I couldn't untie. That photo, once a symbol of unity, now felt like proof of exclusion. Share this story to reach further. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. I grabbed my laptop and started thinking about how I could reverse this. Not just restore the photo, but transform it into something Emily would never forget. I spent the night rummaging through old folders on my computer until I found the digital version of the original photo, intact, before the cropping. I looked at my smiling face in that image and felt a mixture of relief and fury. Relief that I had proof I was there, and fury that she had tried to erase it. That's when the idea struck. It wouldn't just be a reprint. I'd do something much bigger, more impactful. I'd take the photo, blow it up to the max, and add a detail that would completely change the narrative, something that would force everyone to look at me again. But in a way, Emily would never dare crop. I opened an image editor and got to work. With each adjustment, each detail I added, the image went from being just a memory to a statement. I didn't want cheap revenge. I wanted something that would stick in the memory of everyone who saw it. As the cursor moved across the screen, the figure I'd added came to life in the image. A subtle yet disturbing detail. It wasn't grotesque or explicit, just enough to make anyone who viewed it sense something was wrong. A presence, a shadow, something that hadn't been there before, but that now, no one could ignore. When I finished, I looked at the final image and felt a chill. It was perfect. More than that, it was inevitable. And with each passing second, the desire to see her reaction grew inside me like a wildfire. It was time to turn a wound into a weapon. The next day, I went to a print shop a few blocks from home, the kind of place that printed banners and billboards. I handed the file to the clerk, a middle-aged man with crooked glasses, who seemed more interested in his coffee than in me. He glanced at the screen and frowned for a moment, as if he'd noticed something strange in the image, but he didn't say anything. He just asked what size I wanted. I replied immediately, "As big as you can get." He raised an eyebrow in surprise, but typed something into the system and said it would be ready by the end of the day. As I left, I felt my heart race, not from nervousness, but from anticipation. I knew that when that photo was developed in its giant form, the impact would be much more than just visual. I spent the next few hours imagining the scene, Emily standing there, staring at the face she'd tried to erase, but which now returned larger, more present, accompanied by the figure I'd added. I wanted to see her expression change, from contempt to confusion, from confusion to discomfort. I wanted her to feel the weight of every decision she'd made to exclude me. When I returned to pick up the printout, the clerk didn't make eye contact. He simply handed me the carefully wrapped roll of paper and said, "You're going to scare someone with this." The phrase rang in my head as I carried the package like it was sacred. Deep down, I knew he was right. When I got home, I left the scroll leaning against the wall and just stared at it. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was the embodiment of everything I wanted to say, but never found the words to express. And that night, before I went to sleep, I decided exactly how and where she would see it. The perfect moment came 2 days later, when my mom announced we were having family dinner on Saturday. Emily would be there, of course, sitting at the same table as me, pretending nothing had happened. I felt butterflies in my stomach, realizing this would be the perfect opportunity to show everyone what she'd made and what I'd prepared in response. I spent the day preparing the dining room impeccably, but with one detail no one noticed. I covered the wall behind the table with a large cloth, hiding the giant print. When everyone arrived and was seated, I would reveal it, and there would be no way to ignore it. The night of the dinner, the mood seemed normal. Laughter, plates filling, conversations flowing. Emily avoided looking at me, but every now and then I caught her glancing at me, with that same air of veiled superiority. I knew she believed the cropped photo had been a forgotten act, a clipping from the past. When dessert was served, I called for everyone's attention. "I have something to show you," I announced, and stood up. Slowly, I walked to the wall and grabbed the edges of the tablecloth. Silence fell over the table. I could even hear the sound of Emily's fork hitting the plate. With a single tug, the cloth fell away, revealing the image in all its grandeur. There I was, smiling as in the original photo. But in the background, almost unnoticed, was the figure I'd added, tall and dark, watching the family with eyes that seemed alive. The air grew heavy, and Emily's face. It was worth every second I spent planning. For a few seconds, no one said anything. The entire room was suspended in an almost palpable silence, as if the air had stopped circulating. Everyone was looking at the giant photo, but not at me, but at the figure I'd added. It was curious how no one could ignore her, even though she was blurry and half hidden in the scene. She seemed part of the family, yet at the same time, she stood out from everything around her, carrying a silent presence. My father was the first to break the silence. What is that?" he asked in a low, almost choked voice, as if afraid of the answer. My mother looked away, and I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. Emily, however, remained staring at the image, her face completely still, but her eyes wide, as if trying to process something she recognized but didn't want to admit. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked over to the print and ran my hand over the surface, feeling the texture of the paper beneath my fingers, as if confirming to myself that it was real. Then I turned to everyone and said calmly, "This is the photo Emily cut out. Only now, it's complete." The weight of my voice seemed to fill the space, and for a moment, even the figure in the photo seemed to hear me. Emily let out a short, nervous laugh, but didn't take her eyes off the image. "This is ridiculous," she began, but her voice trailed off before she could finish. She leaned forward slightly, as if trying to get closer to the figure in the background, and I saw her expression change from mockery to discomfort. It was then that I realized. She knew that face. The mood at the table changed completely. The food lost its flavor. Conversations died down, and everyone exchanged quick glances, as if trapped in the same feeling that something wasn't right. And yet, no one could look away from the photo. That's when I realized my plan had worked far beyond what I expected. After the revelation, dinner was practically over. My father got up and began clearing the plates, but he did so mechanically, as if he were just trying to occupy himself so he wouldn't stare at the wall. My mother didn't say a word and continued staring at the photo, as if trying to remember where she'd seen that dark, fixed gaze. Emily, however, didn't touch her food again and remained seated, her arms crossed, as if shielding herself from something. I took advantage of the silence to observe the reactions. It was as if the figure in the photo had become a physical presence in the room. The atmosphere was colder, and for a moment, I swear I saw the shadow projected on the wall shift slightly, even though no one had moved. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a suggestion from the light, but another part wasn't so sure. Emily finally spoke, but she didn't look at me. "You shouldn't have done that." Her voice was low, firm, and filled with something that sounded like fear, though she tried to hide it. "You don't know what you're doing." The words hung in the air, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. My father stopped clearing the dishes and stared at Emily. "What are you talking about?" But she didn't answer. She slowly got up, grabbed her bag, and said she had to leave. No one tried to stop her. The sound of her footsteps echoed down the hallway to the front door, and then silence again. I looked at the photo one more time before pulling the cloth over it. But before the fabric completely obscured it, I had the impression that the figure was closer to the group in the image than before, as if it had taken a step forward. At that moment, I realized that perhaps I had started something I couldn't control. The next morning, I woke to my phone vibrating nonstop. It was an unknown number, and my first reaction was to ignore it. But the call rang once, twice, 3 times until I answered. At first, there was no sound, just a low hiss, like interference. Then a voice whispered, "She's closer now." A chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't say anything. The call ended, leaving only an uneasy silence in the room. I got up and went to the dining room. The cloth I'd used to cover the photo lay on the floor. as if someone had pulled it away during the night. The image was exposed, and the figure in the background seemed even closer, its face now almost visible, its eyes fixed on me, following me wherever I went. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize, the feeling that it wasn't just a photographic print consumed me. I decided to call Emily, but she didn't answer. I sent messages, and they all just had a tick. No read receipt. That's when I started to wonder if she'd actually gone home the night before. The memory of the way she looked at the photo, with a mix of fear and recognition, wouldn't leave my mind. I sat on the couch, trying to think logically, but the silence in the house began to suffocate me. Then I heard the same interfering sound from the phone call coming from inside the dining room. I walked in slowly and realized the sound seemed to be coming from the photo itself. I leaned closer and heard my voice clearly, but distorted. "You brought her back." I jumped away, my heart pounding. I grabbed the cloth and tried to cover the image again, but I felt a strange resistance, as if the cloth were stuck to the paper. It was then that I realized the figure was smiling. Late that afternoon, my mom called to see if I'd heard from Emily. She said she'd been trying to reach her since the night before, but every call went straight to voicemail. She was worried, and for the first time, I heard a genuine nervousness in her voice. When I mentioned the photo, there was a long silence on the other end, followed by a, "Maybe we should leave that alone," before hanging up. My inner alarm went off. Something was wrong. I drove to Emily's apartment, but when I arrived, I found the door ajar. Inside, everything was in its place, except for the living room, where dozens of photos were scattered on the floor. They were all cutouts of the same family photo, and in all of them, the shadowy figure was present, even in the ones that should have been originals. I called out to her repeatedly, but there was no answer. The only thing I found was her phone, left on the table, the screen still lit, showing the giant photo I'd had printed. I looked closer and noticed something disturbing. In the image, the figure was standing next to Emily, holding her arm. A chill ran through me from head to toe. I grabbed my phone, and as I walked out, I felt a weight in the air, as if someone were standing behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing, just the open door and the silent hallway. I drove home fast, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and, for a moment, I swear I saw someone stopped on the shoulder, watching my car. When I walked into the house, I found the cloth on the floor again, and this time, the figure in the photo was no longer in the background. She was in my place at the family table. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure sitting in my chair in the photo, looking directly at me. The most disturbing detail was that his body seemed clearer each time I looked, as if the image were updating itself. Before I knew it, I could no longer see the backyard, just a dark shadow filling the entire space behind the table. At 3 a.m, I heard a low sound coming from the dining room. I got up slowly, each step echoing in the silent house. When I arrived, I found the chair where I usually sat slightly away from the table. I tried to remember if I had left it that way, but I was sure I hadn't. The impression on the wall looked different, the figure more erect, as if it had just stood up. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water and try to calm down, but as I passed through the hallway, I felt a chilly draft, unheard of in a house with all the windows closed. I looked back and saw something that made my stomach turn. The shadow cast by the living room light wasn't mine. She was much taller, with broad shoulders and a strange, almost elongated head shape. I tried turning on all the lights, but some simply wouldn't come on. It was as if darkness had settled in certain spots of the house and refused to leave. I went to the closet, grabbed a blanket, and sat on the couch, determined to stay awake until dawn. But just before sunrise, I heard slow, heavy footsteps coming from the dining room. When I summoned the courage to look, the chair where the figure had sat in the photo was empty again, and in its place, on the table, was a new envelope. I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. It was identical to the one I'd used to deliver the file to the printer, but it had no return address. Opening it, I found a single sheet with a handwritten sentence. "I've always been here, but now I can stay." The paper had the same sickly, sweet smell I'd smelled the day of dinner, and it made my stomach churn. I returned my gaze to the giant photo on the wall. For the first time, I realized it wasn't just the figure shifting. The rest of the family looked different too, as if their gazes were beginning to shift away from one another and fix on the shadowy presence. It was as if everyone, including me, were slowly being consumed by it. I took out my phone to take a picture of the printout, and compare it to the original, but when I looked at the screen, what I saw made my blood run cold. The image on the phone showed the room as it was at that moment. Only the figure wasn't on the paper. It was standing directly behind me. I whirled around, but no one was there. Just the echo of my own movement and the distant sound of something falling to the floor. I ran to the kitchen and locked myself inside, trying to think of what to do. My heart was beating so fast it seemed to fill the entire room. It was then that I heard a single knock on the kitchen door, followed by the low, drawling voice, "You too will be cut." And I realized this story wasn't about Emily anymore. The next day, as I was trying to process everything that had happened, I heard a quick, insistent knock on the front door. When I opened it, I found Emily. She was pale, her hair disheveled, and her eyes sunken, as if she hadn't slept in days. Before I could say anything, she came in and locked the door, breathing raggedly. "We need to talk about the photo," she said bluntly. We sat in the living room, and she avoided looking at the wall where the print still hung. When she finally looked up, I saw a mix of fear and regret on her face. "I cut you out of that picture because she was there," she said, pointing to the figure in the background. "You didn't realize it, but she's always been in all our family photos, and every time someone gets too close to her, something bad happens." My stomach sank. I wanted to laugh at that, but the changes in the image and what I'd witnessed made me doubt it. I asked why she hadn't told me sooner. Because it wouldn't do any good. She likes to be seen. And now that you've put her out there like this, huge, for all to see, you've given her what she wanted. Her words sounded like a sentence, not a warning. Emily stood up, and with a determined expression, said the only way to stop this was to destroy the photo. She grabbed a pair of scissors from the drawer, but as she approached the wall, the fallen cloth moved on its own, sliding to partially cover the image. We both froze in that instant. Then a fold of the cloth fell away again, revealing only the figure's face. And it was smiling broadly and unsettlingly. Emily dropped the scissors to the floor, and the sound echoed through the room as if it were much louder than it should have been. That's when I realized that destroying that photo might no longer be possible. Even with fear gripping my chest, I grabbed the scissors from the floor and ran to the printout. I ripped the paper surface with all my strength, hearing the harsh, dry sound of the fibers breaking. But to my surprise, beneath the torn layer was another, identical image. It was as if the paper regenerated itself instantly, each cut revealing only more of the same scene. Emily took a few steps back, mumbling something I couldn't understand, and then pointed to the figure in the photo. "Look at the eyes." I stepped closer and felt my body go cold. They were blinking. It wasn't an optical illusion. It wasn't a reflection. They were actually moving. The sound of slow, deep breathing began to fill the room, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. We started to back away, but the light in the room flickered and went out completely. In the darkness, the breathing grew closer until something cold brushed my shoulder. I turned on the flashlight on my phone on impulse, and for a second, I swear I saw the figure from the outside of the photo, standing between us and the exit door. Emily grabbed my arm, and we ran to the bedroom, locking the door behind us. We sat there on the floor, listening for any sign of movement. But what came was much worse. A constant scratching, coming from inside the door, as if something was trying to get in. I looked at Emily and realized that, for the first time, we both understood that this was no longer a cursed photo. It was an open door. The scratching on the door suddenly stopped, leaving a silence so heavy it seemed to press against our ears. Emily and I exchanged tense glances, and it was then that we realized something. The sound was now coming from somewhere else. Slowly, I turned my head and saw that the reflection in the bedroom mirror showed not the two of us sitting on the floor, but the dining room, and the figure standing in its center. She didn't move, but the reflection seemed sharper than it should have been, as if it weren't just an image. With each passing second, the background grew darker, until only her silhouette remained. Then, with a single step, she approached the lens and disappeared from the reflection. It was at that moment that we heard the heavy footsteps. In the hallway, outside the room, Emily jumped to her feet and grabbed my hand. We stood in complete silence, listening to the slow approach. The floorboards creaked under their weight, and each step seemed to take forever. The doorknob turned slowly, even with the door locked, and the metallic sound echoed as if it were inside our heads. Without a second thought, I pushed the dresser against the door, trying to create a barrier. But at the same moment, the overhead light flickered violently and burst, plunging us into total darkness. In the darkness, I heard the voice, low, slurred, and exactly like my own. "Now, it's your turn to be in the picture." The air turned chilly, and I felt a hand touch my shoulder. Only Emily was standing in front of me. I turned on my phone's flashlight with trembling hands, illuminating the room. The figure was there, standing against the opposite wall. It wasn't moving, but its eyes were fixed on me, glowing in a way that wasn't human. Its skin seemed made of condensed shadow, and yet, there were features that resembled my own face, distorted as if seen through water. Emily grabbed my arm and tried to pull me to the window, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The figure began to move, slow and silent, and with each step, the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the air growing thinner. I tried to scream, but my voice simply wouldn't come. It was then that she stopped less than a meter away from me. She reached out and her fingertips touched my chest. A wave of cold ran through me and images flooded my mind. All the old photos, all the family memories, but with the figure always there, closer with each passing year. And at the end of this sequence, an image I'd never seen before. Me, trapped inside the photo itself, looking out. I gathered what little strength I had and pushed Emily toward the window, yelling at her to jump. The glass shattered, and she disappeared into the darkness outside. The figure grabbed my arm, and I felt like I was being pulled into something dense and airless, like sinking into icy water. The last thing I saw before I lost my vision was the dining room, and the print on the wall, now showing my chair occupied by me, smiling, while the figure stood in the background, motionless. After that, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting at the dining room table. The light was strange, as if it came from an eternal afternoon, without sun or shade. I looked around and saw my family, all frozen in fixed smiles, motionless as dolls. The only thing that moved was the figure, slowly circling behind them, as if studying me. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't budge. It was then that I realized there was no weight on my body, no breathing. I turned my head and saw that what held me were not chains, but the very edge of the photograph. I was inside it. I could see the frame as if it were a window to the outside, and on the other side was Emily, standing in the room, looking at me. She didn't seem surprised. On the contrary, her gaze held something between regret and relief. Then, without a word, she pulled the cloth away and covered the photo, leaving me in total darkness. In this absolute darkness, I felt the figure approaching until I could hear its breathing behind me, and when it spoke, it was in my voice. "Now we are two." Since then, I've watched every person who passes through the room. I know when someone stops to look at the photo. I can sense when one of them begins to notice something in the background that wasn't there before, and I wait, patiently, for the next person to come close enough to enter. Share this story to reach more people, subscribe to the channel, send it to someone on WhatsApp, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Maybe I've seen you before.